Hey everyone, welcome back to today's show. On today's show, we have Devin Miller, who's the founder and CEO of Miller IP Law. Devin, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Of course. Well, Devin, tell us about yourself. I see you do IP law. What does IP mean? And I want to hear your story.
The story is a longer discussion, but at least IP is one that I can answer in a bit shorter. IP it stands for intellectual property. Intellectual property, kind of the easiest way, at least for kind of me to think about it, is that you know one thing that people generally understand is when you own real property, right? So you own a house, you own a car, you own land or whatever that might be, and it's physical, it's tangible, it's easy to understand. Hey, this is mine. I own it. I purchased it. What's a bit more difficult is when you get into intangible things, which are, kind of on more the intellectual pride. Side. So, when you create an invention, how do you capture all the value of the R&D, the research and development and everything that went into it? Or if you're creating a brand, how do you capture the value of that brand? Because brands can be very valuable. And same thing if you do a podcast, do a video, write a book, do a painting or sculpture. How do you kind of capture all the value that goes into that? And so that's really what intellectual property entails. And so there's kind of intellectual property is an umbrella term that generally kind of has three things that go underneath it. So one is patents. Patents are going to go towards invention, something that does something that has a utility, a functionality. The second one is going to be on trademarks, and trademarks are going to go towards branding, name of a company, a name of a product, a catchphrase, a logo, those type of things. And the last one is going to be copyrights, and copyrights are going to be more for creatives. And so that's going to be more on, something that you create that's on the creative side. So as I mentioned, book, painting, sculpture, viral video, those type of things are all going to be on the copyright side. And really is kind of capturing that value of all that research and development, that R&D, that effort to build that brand or to build that invention, and how you capture that is where intellectual property comes in.
Great. Thanks for going over that. So does IP include all three of those, or is just certain parts of all three?
Yeah, so IP is kind of an umbrella term that includes all of those. So if you hear someone that's talking about IP or intellectual property, they could be referring to one or all of the above.
That's great. So can anything be considered IP, or are there certain criteria that has to be met to be considered intellectual property?
Yeah, I mean, generally, if it's an invention, a brand, or a creative, it falls into one of those buckets. And so, not everything falls into those buckets. But if you're thinking, hey, I've created an invention as something new or unique or different, that's going to fall under intellectual property. If you creating a brand, falls under intellectual property. Creative, something you create does. So for most businesses, and whether you're an inventor, an entrepreneur, or your startup, your small business, or a larger business, you're generally going to have at least one of those buckets for the most part that falls. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to invest in it. Doesn't mean you make sense. You always go forward for it, but you would have things that would be in that realm that you could protect. And so most businesses do. Some of them, it doesn't make sense to invest in it, but most of them do, as far as that goes.
Great. So what about, for example, personal branding? Let's say my name, VJ Kailash, I build a brand around my name. Is that considered IP? Can someone steal it? Could I sue them for that? Or what is it?
So, you chose a hard example, but I'll give you the best answer. So it would fall under brand. I guess it depends on how you're using your name. What I'd assume is if you're saying, hey, if I use my name for branding, for doing a podcast, or for services I offer, something along those lines, is it fall under IP? Well, yes, it falls generally under trademarks. It would be part of a brand. The reason I smile is because names are generally the most, or one of the more difficult categories to protect within trademarks. And the reason being is there's a lot of people with the same or very similar names. I am not the only Devin Miller out there. I know there are other ones out there. When you do the Google and it comes up, I think I ranked number 1 or 2. There's a football player that I have no idea who they are, has the same name. But we both have the same name. And so with that, I can't stop him from using his name as part of what he's doing, no more than he can stop me from using it with my law firm. And so unless you are the 1% of the 1%, meaning you're very famous, everybody, if you're taking Michael Jordan, people hear Michael Jordan, they always think of the basketball player. Maybe now the actor as well, but it's generally Michael Jordan. You hear Tom Cruise, there's really only one Tom Cruise that everybody knows. Or, Donald Trump, whichever side of the aisle you're on politics, everybody knows that name and associates it with one person. And that's the way trademarks work. And so, unless you're the person that is so famous that everybody associates your name with it, you're generally not able to protect your name on itself, in and of itself. So, to give you another example, name of my law firm is Miller IP Law. Took the first name or my last name, which is Miller, and then IP Law is a type of law that we practice. That is going to be very difficult to protect those words because it has my last name and all it describes is the services we're offering. And so I can't really stop other people from using their last name, and I can't stop other people from saying, hey, I have a law firm that offers intellectual property. So that's a difficult one. Now, what I can do is we also have, and you can see half of it on the screen here, but a logo that goes along with the business. I can protect the logo for the aesthetic look and feel to it. And so if you had, with your example, VJ, if you had a cool logo that had your name in it, that had an aesthetic nature, you can protect that logo. You can't stop others from using the same or similar name, but you can stop others from using that logo, if that makes sense.
That was extremely helpful. Thank you. So, I guess in the startup process, at what point should companies start worrying about IP and getting legal help or even start considering it?
Yeah, I mean, there's no bright line right answer that hey, whenever you hit this milestone, you should always consider IP. I'll give you a few kind of guide rails as to what you might consider. So, one is if you are, the best factor that I found is what I call the ouch factor, which is basically is if your business is getting to a point that if somebody to come along and whether it's rip off your invention if you're a product business or rip off your brand if you're a brand business or rip off your creatives, if they're to come along and knock it off and either doing it intentionally or just doing it unaware of your brand, but nonetheless they were to knock it off or copy it, would that hurt the business? And if you're saying, well, it'd be a little bit of annoyance, but we just change the logo or change the name of the business, or yeah, we haven't got that far with product development. In other words, it doesn't really have an ouch to the business. It doesn't really impact it that much. You're probably early enough on, you don't need to worry about it. If on the other hand, you're saying, oh no, I mean, we've spent tens of thousands or millions of dollars, whatever the price is, in advertising or creating this next generation product. We're creating the next best smartphone that's going to knock everybody's socks off. And if somebody comes along and knocks it off, that's going to really be impactful for a business. That's probably when you're saying if it's going to ouch or it's going to hurt the business, you've reached a point that it has value that you're going to want to protect. Usually you're going to want to do it just a bit earlier, so you don't want to get to the point that you've already done all that investing and it's already out there and now you're trying to play catch up. But as you're kind of approaching that, saying, hey, we're starting to invest in our brand, we're starting to invest in ours, and in 6 months this is really going to be something valuable, you're going to want to start or thinking about it. On the one other thing on the patents in particular, and it's kind of the same along always, the other thing you always have to consider with really all three of them, copyrights, trademarks, or patents, but particularly with patents and trademarks, is really the first person to file for it is going to be the presumptive owner. And so if you are the first one to file for a trademark, you're the first one to file for a patent or a copyright, you are in the best position. So if it is a competitive marketplace, a lot of people are doing things. There's a lot of innovations or a lot of branding or a lot of whatever it might be going on in that particular industry. It can accelerate that time frame. So in other words, if it was an industry that's kind of slowly moving, not a lot of competition, not a big deal, you might be able to push that timeline out a bit longer and wait a bit longer because it's less likely, your risk is lower that somebody else is going to come along and knock it off. On the other hand, you're in a very competitive industry, a lot of people innovating or doing something in there, then it's going to push that time frame forward. The last guardrail I would give is particularly on patents is there is a rule out there, and it's part of patent law, that anytime you put anything out in the public, you have a 1 year time clock from which you can file a patent application on it. So let's say you created the world's best smartphone. It's gonna blow Apple, Samsung, and everybody else away. It's going to be a game changer. And you put it out in the marketplace. You're trying to, trying to crowdsource it. You're trying to get it out and going. And you wait 1 year and a day, and then you come into my office and say, okay, we finally got the business up and going. We're ready to get it protected. And I wish I had this happen. And it's usually not a year and 1 day, but we'll have clients come in the office and say, well, we've been out in the marketplace for a couple of years. We didn't have money. We just got started and we finally got some traction. Now we want to file a patent on this to make sure we have it protected. And then it's the unfortunate conversation of, that's awesome that your business is doing well. I'm excited that it's taking off. Unfortunately, we're not able to get a patent on it because you missed that 1 year window. So from the first time you put it out in the public, you start that 1 year time clock ticking. And that can be everything from website, presentation, going out and pitching it for investors, crowdsourcing, anything of those nature, you get that 1 year time clock ticking. So that is one thing that trips people up a lot on the patent side and inventing side is you're aware of that 1 year time clock. They miss that window and then they're trying to play catch up or trying to do plans B or C or D or whatever it is to navigate that. So those are a few guidelines when you're thinking about when you should be getting started or what you might consider.
Thank you for that. I had no idea about that 1 year timeline. So let's say you start a product, 6 months later, there's another competitor who also starts a product. Is it the first person to file that wins, or does the person who started first still have that 6 months left?
In that scenario, you're both host. So, and the reason being, so what happens? That's a bit of it. So I'll give you two scenarios because one was let's say you would put it out there. You were inventing something and the competitor, they didn't put it out in the public. So we've got to differentiate it whether the competitor put it out in the public or not, because it's two different scenarios. So scenario one, you've been working for 6 months. You're creating the next best smartphone. It's going to knock everybody's socks off. A competitor, unbeknownst to you, just happened to be working on the same problem, at the same time, which happens more often than people think. And they came up with a very similar idea. If they were to not necessarily put down the public, but file on the patent application first, you're host. In other words, they with very rare exception and Hail Mary kind of, if you have to, you can try and do it. But really, basically, if they file on it first, they're the presumptive inventors. They just boxed you out and you're no longer able to pursue your invention. That's scenario one. So they haven't put down the public. They filed on the patent first. You're kind of just dead in the water. Sorry, you missed out. The other scenario is, let's say they come along, put it out in the public first. And so let's say you've been working on it for 6 months, competitor does a press release and they say, we got the next best smartphone. It's going to do all, and you're looking saying, that's exactly what we're doing. Well, now you've got a problem if you can't file a patent on it at all either, because once something is put out on the public by someone else, it now is cited against you as previous inventions for your patent application. So if somebody that come along, put it out in the public, not even having to file a patent on it, they have now put it out there, and anything that they put out, when you file your patent application, it goes through an examination process. Part of that examination process is whether or not somebody else has previously invented this. If somebody else before you filed your application has already invented it, you can't get a patent on it. So if they put it out in the public before you file your patent on it, you just have a previous invention that you now have to try and say how you're different from. And if you're the same or very similar, you're going to have a difficult time. So both of those scenarios, not a good place to be, and generally you're going to want to avoid it. So that's why if you're inventing something, you're looking to put it out in the marketplace, the longer you wait, the higher your risk profile goes. You can miss the 1 year window. A competitor can put it out first. They can file on it first, all of which can put you dead in the water.
Okay, so just because, again, I don't have a legal background whatsoever, so this is all brand new to me, and I'm loving this. If someone were to just publicly put their product out in the market and they don't have a patent, they're okay because now they basically are the ones that created it, or do they still need to have the patent filed?
So assuming that they don't infringe anybody, in other words, they don't infringe anybody else's patent. So nobody else had previously filed a patent on it, but for your scenario, they created something new. Nobody else had previously created it. They put it out in the marketplace. They put it out in the public. They say, hey, we don't want to bother with the patent. We're just going to compete and see how it goes. So in that scenario, basically, it's open to anybody. So anybody could come along. They could reverse engineer it. They can knock it off. They can compete. And there is no proprietary nature or protection for that business. And so if they're okay in saying, yep, we're going to put it out there, there are some companies that will do that. They'll say, hey, we're just going to continue to out innovate and out compete the marketplace. If you're okay with that, then by all means. But you do have to recognize that if somebody figures out, it's kind of like the magic trick where once you know how it's done, it's easier to replicate it. Same thing with a lot of products. It takes a lot of research and development, R&D, time, marketing, testing it out with to make sure it works with all of the consumers. But once you've done all that and you put it out there and somebody says, oh, that's an awesome idea. I think I could do that and I can do it cheaper or I can do it more efficiently. They can go do it if you don't have a patent on it. And so you have to decide, do I want to have some protections around it? Do I want to be able to control or to stop others from doing it? Or do I just want to have everybody is open to do it and we'll see how it works out in the marketplace?
Got it. How long do patents last? Is there a finite time period or do they last indefinitely?
Everybody love it if they, or the businesses that or have the patents would love it if they lasted indefinitely, but no. So they last 20 years from the time you file.
Got it. And can they refile it, or at that point, is it open to the public? Anyone can just copy that product?
So for whatever is covered in the patent, once it expires after those 20 years, it becomes publicly available. And that's kind of the trade-off with the reason the patent system was set up. In other words, what they're trying to do is say, we are incentivizing you to go out first to innovate. And what we're saying is, and also they want you to disclose all the details of how your invention works. And so part of the patent application, you describe in pretty great detail how your invention works, what it does, how it functions. And what they're saying is, in exchange for you putting it out in the public, telling everybody how your invention works, you get a finite window to where you can have exclusivity. You can go enforce it and stop others from doing it. On the flip side is, once you reach the end of that window, we want to incentivize people to continue to innovate or to create or to build on top of it. So, give you an example. Let's say you created the black and white television. First person to ever create a television. It was in black and white. You put all the details out in the public, but you file the patent on it. You now have 20 years of exclusivity for all of that technology. But what it does is it incentivizes someone else to come along and say, "Oh, that's interesting. That's a great invention. I now can build on top of that and figure out how to do a color television. So now I'm going to improve on that." Well, for those 20 years, you still own the or television, all the underlying technology. So one, the color television person either has to wait until your patent expires, or two, they're going to come and take a license from you or try and acquire your patent or do something of that nature, and you're able to capture that value. But for those 20 years, you can do it. Now, what a lot of times will also happen is let's take the iPhone, because we talked about smartphones earlier on. The iPhone, the very first one they put out, and the one that's there out today have a lot of differences, right? Bigger battery size, better cameras, bigger screen, better touch screen, all these different things that make it better. Well, all of those incremental inventions or creations that they added onto the smartphone, they can continue to file patents on those later on. So let's say they filed a patent on the original smartphone. 20 years after, if you want to go make the original smartphone, by all means, you could go and do it. But what you can't do is, for all those incremental and innovations that they continue to work on, they file new patents on you, and you're not able to go and get those until those expires for 20 years. So you kind of incrementally are building a portfolio, and as you continue to innovate and put those out there, you're continuing to protect it, and so your product can stay ahead.
Got it. So, how different do two products have to be before infringing on, I guess, the legal side of this? Like, for example, if there's a certain product that has multiple uses, just the fact you could use it for a different purpose, are you infringing on any IP laws?
So as far as or patents protect is not specific to the use case. So in other words, so let's say I was the first inventor of the car, the automobile. And I'm Henry Ford. Henry Ford didn't really create the automobile, but we'll give him credit anyway. But so, first inventor of the automobile. It doesn't matter if that automobile is used for furniture and all you do is go and sit in it, whether you drive it, whether you use it for a shelf in your house. And I'm making it up because those are very good examples, but it doesn't matter use case. So the way patents work is, when you file them, you have a section in the patent application that's called a claim section. Basically, the claim section is kind of a bullet pointed type section where it says, my invention includes these features A, B, C, and D. If somebody else comes along and their invention includes A, B, C, and D, they've now infringed on your patent. Doesn't matter if they include E and F and they add additional things to it. If it includes A, B, C, and D, they infringe. So if I come along and I have the black and white television, now I create the color television. Black and white television has A, B, C, and D. My color television has A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. I still infringe because I have A, B, and C, and D. Alternatively, let's say you come along and you figure out a way, hey, I really don't need A, B, C, and D. I just need A and D. So I drop B and C because my invention doesn't need it. You don't infringe on their patent because you have to have each of the limitations or those bullet points in their patent covers. If you don't have all of them, you're fine and you don't infringe. If you have all of them, then you infringe. And so it depends on kind of how broad their patent is, how many of those features they have listed, and then whether or not your product has those features as well. If you do, you're infringing on theirs. If you don't, then you're fine.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you for that. Let's switch gears to royalties. specifically with music. How does that work? Is there also a finite period of time where, let's say I'm streaming something on Spotify, the artist gets paid something. How long do they get that indefinitely, or is there a time period on that as well?
So and that would fall under, or generally, if you're saying like music streaming, that's under copyright. So most of the time, unless you have very old songs. So if you're talking about older songs, in the 90s or that, and some of the earlier ones in the 70s, there are some different rules that apply. So you always have to check when the song came out and which is the applicable law. But let's say you wrote for easier conversation, let's say you wrote a song today and you wanted to do it. The length of a copyright is 90 years, or the life of the author plus 90 years. So in other words, you would get your whole life, however long you live, plus 90 years is generally how it covers. Now, it does vary a bit if it's owned by a business or created by a business as opposed to an individual. That time frame can vary for a bit. So generally, you're somewhere between your life plus 70 to 90 years is what you could get royalties on. A bit situational, specific, but it gives you a pretty good idea. So there's a pretty good long life to copyrights, but the other ones is they do have they do have a life expectancy. So if you're to take some of the ones that have had to deal with this, and they also have a lot of lobbying to change the laws on that, which is a whole different rabbit hole. You take as an example Disney. Disney has been around quite a long time. When they started in the film industry and the movies, they have reached on some of their copyrights the end of their copyrights or their other things that they're doing. And so now they're having to say, as an example, Mickey Mouse is copyrighted. Now we have to make sure. So they're kind of always updating and changing and making it new so they can kind of get a reset on their current Mickey Mouse as opposed to the original Mickey Mouse. And it's because they've now reached the end of that window and they're now trying to say, well, we've got a whole bunch of value here. How do we kind of continue to monetize or keep that? But for the short answer, it's generally your life plus 70 to 90 years, depending on if you're a business or a single individual.
Got it. Thank you. So with all this new technologies coming out with cryptocurrencies and NFTs, have you been diving into that space from the legal side?
Um, to some degree. I mean, I don't get into it as much as one where I kind of stand back. So for me, I don't understand. I don't get it from a why would people buy it perspective most of the time. Now I get cryptocurrency probably the most. People are just using that for me primarily as an investment. You can't really go out and exchange cryptocurrency. You don't typically go out and buy something with cryptocurrency. So the most part, people are just investing in this right now as a basically similar to a stock, hoping that the price goes up and maybe someday it will actually reach that critical mass that it's going to then be usable as an actual currency. Hasn't reached that yet, not at least on big scale. Maybe if you go buy, I think Tesla at some point, sometimes you can buy cryptocurrency or buy their cars with cryptocurrency. But some of the other ones, like as an example, they're coming out with, and I think it's Walmart, if I remember right, was coming out with, you can go for your virtual home. You can now with Walmart, and I don't know if they've rolled it out or they're just planning to, you can go buy curtains for your virtual home. You can go buy couches and beds and everything else for your virtual home. And I guess I don't understand it from the perspective of, I know how it works, but why you would go out and buy virtual curtains as opposed to real curtains. I don't get why you would invest in it, but putting that, there's another story of, I think it's Snoop Dogg, and people are probably going to listen to this and say, no, it's not Snoop Dogg, that had a virtual house and someone paid like $400,000 or $500,000 for the virtual real estate next to his house, even though it's not real estate, it's virtual real estate. So from that perspective, it's one that's a bit of a wild west because, the legal industry in general is a slow moving thing that takes time to catch up. And so when you have what NFTs are generally newer out in the marketplace, you have everything from virtual currency, you have, virtual housing and real estate, and you have people that are selling different works of art. You have the Charlie Bit Me video that they pulled off of YouTube and sold as NFTs and those type of things. And some of those are starting to be fleshed out in the legal industry, but to a large degree, it's still a bit of the Wild West because the legal industry is lagging behind or slower to figure out how they want to do with it. So there's some rules in place. This generally falls mostly under copyright law, although we work with a lot of patent stuff with some of our clients on NFTs and how they use the technology to create them, but the ownership is generally under copyright. It's reasonably fleshed out, but also kind of the Wild West.
Thank you so much for that. Let's switch gears a little bit more into valuing a business. So, for example, how do you value a business with a certain type of patent and compare that to the exact same business with slightly different type of patent?
Yeah, I mean, valuing patents is always an exercise. It isn't, and I've been through it multiple times with businesses I've owned as well as helping other businesses. Figuring out the value is not, it can be, and it's kind of the same thing as how do you evaluate a business? Now sometimes you can say, well, a business has so many products, it has so much recurring revenue, it has so much client base. And so you can evaluate it off that. When you get into, as an example, patents, even the same thing with brands, now you're going to have, it's not a as easy to tangible thing. And so patents are a bit easier if you have a product out there, because basically you're saying, okay, what is a product? How much is that product valuable? How much is it worth? We'll put a multiple on that, and then we're going to say, now for protecting that product is, how much is a patent worth? Well, part of it goes into, are there other competitors that would either are knocking it off, and so you can go and enforce a patent, or that you're fending off, or that you're licensing to because they're doing it. And so you can start to look and say, okay, how much is it worth in the marketplace because we have exclusivity, or are we already licensing it to other people, and how much are those licenses worth? And it can give you a pretty good idea. So that's kind of how you go about valuing it to a degree. You're also going to look and see how broad is a patent. If it's a very broad patent, so give you an example of a very broad, valuable patent that was a while back, and I think it was with Motorola. I'd have to go double check, but it was one of the original or earlier chip manufacturers that was doing it for microchips. And they figured out a way that was a glue that allowed you to stack microchips. Very valuable. It was honestly, when they filed it, it was kind of an afterthought. They said, well, this is something we'll file on. Didn't think about it much. But come to find out, basically everybody had to use that glue. Everybody had to use that process. So it was a very valuable patent because it blocked everybody else from doing it. And everybody ended up going and getting a license from them. And so that's kind of how they evaluate it. Said, well, we've got a lot of licensing. What is the revenue potential from all those licenses? We'll evaluate it that way. That's easy if you have the licenses in place. It's more difficult if you're earlier on and you're saying, hey, we have a valuable invention. Then you're kind of similar with the business. If it's pre-revenue, you're trying to estimate what is the likelihood of the value of this product in the marketplace. How many competitors are there? What is the opportunity to have exclusivity? And so it's one that is pretty particular. And so you're always looking to try and guesstimate as best you can, estimate what those potentials of the patent are, and then that's where you set the value. And then you're just going to go, if you're really going to value patent, it's either what you can convince investors that it's worth, or what you can invest or convince a competitor or someone that's licensing that it's worth.
Got it. So it's very subjective, as what you're
Yep.
saying.
Yeah, kind of the same thing as if you were to evaluate a business. There's always a subjective nature to it as much as there is any, objective nature.
Yeah. So are there people that possibly flip patents? They buy patents and then they sell it to someone who could use it? Or is there a holding period? Or is this just not something that happens?
It happens, but not. You have to be careful when I say it happens, because a lot of times people will come along and I hear it more, reasonably frequently, that, you'll have the idea guy, and I'll put him in quotes, the idea guy, and he'll basically say, I've got the next $1 billion idea, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to go get a patent on, I'm going to file and get a patent on it, and then everybody's going to want to do it. I'm going to sell it for $1 billion. I'll never have to build a company, never build a business. I'm just going to go license it. That happens in less than 1% of the time. Like, just to get a patent and have it so valuable that people are going to want to license it or otherwise acquire it, and you built nothing along with the business, just never happen. Or very, very seldom happens. I'm sure there are instances that it has happened, but it's very rare. Most of the time, patents are a part of a business. Just like you can't have an idea and just try and go sell an idea. Go try and sell an idea to people, they're not going to pay for it. They're even investors. They're going to want to know, what is your team? What is your prospects? What is your experience? What skills? What are you going to do? And even if you're early stage, and the same thing with patents. By themselves, they're difficult to monetize. On the other hand, if you built a great business, it's valuable, and now you're going to sell it, people are going to say, well, what's proprietary about your business? Say, hey, we've got patents that protect our inventions. We've got a very strong brand. We got trademarks, so nobody else can, that everybody is we have very loyal customer base and those type of things. Then it becomes much more valuable. So to go and acquire, or just to get a patent and start to flip it, is going to be difficult. There are a couple exceptions to that. One is, there are what are called patent trolls out there, or non-practicing entities, or there's various names for them, that they will go out and specifically look for patents that are valuable, that are already out there, that they can go and basically sue people for infringement. So they are basically legal entities. They will go and either license or outright acquire patents, and they'll say, hey, this looks like we can go and sue X, Y, or Z individual because they infringe on this patent, and they'll go and acquire it. It's a bit of a toss up. Some people think that they are fine and it's part of a business practice. Other people hate it because they're not actually doing anything other than suing people. So there is that small carve out within the industry, but it's one that's a pretty small carve out. For most people, I would look at it as this is part of building a business and protecting it and growing it. It's not going to be where you're going to make your money on it by itself, but it can be something as a very valuable asset.
Thank you so much. Let's say someone is starting a business or new to entrepreneurship. What kind of advice would you give them from a legal perspective?
Yeah, I mean, so the advice I typically give is to get a plan in place when you're starting the business. Now, I'll caveat that with I have never seen a startup or small business that 6 months or a year later that they're still following that plan, because everybody pivots, everybody adjusts, everybody learns more. But two things the plan does. One is it convinces you when you're getting started that it's worthwhile to actually pursue the endeavor, because doing a startup, a small business, is going to be difficult. You need that convincing of, hey, this is worthwhile to pursue. And if you never get that plan in place, you never do the diligence to actually figure out whether it's worthwhile to pursue or not, I think it increases your odds of failure. The other thing is, with the legal perspective, is with part of that plan is you can have milestones that you will need to hit, even if you're pivoting or adjusting. So as an example, hey, I'm starting a business. I need to get an LLC at the very beginning to make sure I protect myself against personal liability. 6 months in 6 months, we're planning to kick off marketing. At that point, we should really get a trademark because we're going to be investing a lot in a brand. Hey, we're going to be doing a lot of research and development over the next year. At probably 6 or 7 months into that research and development, we really should look into getting a patent. So I think that having that plan in place while there's a lot of pivoting and adjusting is still a worthwhile exercise. Now, I'll give you the one thing that I'm stealing the idea from someone else, so it's not my own idea. But, one of the things that people do is, when you get a business plan, they'll have a 50 or 60-page plan, and it'll have all these details, or they'll have the one-page plan that is very high level, or, very high level and isn't very beneficial. One of the ideas that I've heard is from someone else that I thought was actually a pretty good idea is, rather than going through and doing a full-on business plan, go and build a website. And the reason I say that is because if you're to think about what goes into a good website, it conveys what are your price points. It conveys who is your target audience. What are the features of your product? Is it a brand? Is it a product? How much you're going to sell it for? What is your profit margin? What's your price point? How are you going to acquire customers? How are you going to tell them your story? And all the same things that go into a business plan really have to go into a website. And websites are a lot more fun to build, and they're a lot more tangible. And so I think a lot of times, part of where I think that a good plan comes into effect is go build a website, and that will get you pretty well kicked off.
I love that. I think that's great advice. When you actually put it on paper or figure out from the end user's perspective, you start unlocking a whole bunch of other ideas and thoughts, which you wouldn't have had just in a business plan.
Yep.
Great. And what is your favorite business book and why?
I have a lot of business books. So usually most of the time I listen to them on tape, or I listen to podcasts. So I'd love to sit down and read a book most of the time. By the time I get to the end of the day, I'm like, I'm tired. I've been going for a lot of hours. And so I usually don't read books as much as I used to, but I love reading or I love acquiring knowledge. So I like a few books. EntreLeadership by Dave Ramsey is a great book. It kind of is the mixture of entrepreneurship and leadership. I think has a lot of great details in there. I'm trying to think of the other ones. I like the book Traction, and I can't remember the author, but it's a pretty well-known book. One of the ones that I'm listening to now, and I like to do, so I run about 9 miles each morning, and so it usually takes me about an hour and 45 minutes. Gives me time to listen to a lot of books on tape. One of the ones I'm listening to now, and again, I don't remember the author, but it's called Founders. It goes through all the people that were kind of Silicon Valley that started with PayPal and X.com, which was Elon Musk, and how all of them have now started a business. It's a really fascinating book for entrepreneurship. So those are probably some of the ones I've liked most recently, but there's a lot of good ones out there. If I were to sit down and write them all out, I'd probably come up with 15 or 20 of them easily.
Awesome. Devin, it was an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Where can our guests get in touch with you?
Yeah, so I'll give 3 ways for them to get in touch with me, depending on why they want or how or why they want to get in touch with me. So on the legal perspective, we offer free 15-minute consultations or strategy meetings where You can sit down, schedule some times free of charge, ask your questions. We can give you some guidance, advice. If we can help you, we'll get you set up to get going. If we can't help you, we'll let you know, or if you shouldn't get started, whatever that is. But it's a free 15-minute strategy meeting. So for that, if you want to schedule it, it's an online schedule. It makes it simple and easy. Just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time to chat, and we can do a free consult. For the website in general, if you're just looking to get some advice, you're looking to find out more about what our prices are. We do almost everything on flat fees, really transparent on our pricing. We also have a ton of content. We have our own podcast. We have a ton of video. We have a blog. We have written content. We have just about any way you can consume information. We have it there. For the website in general, go to lawwithmiller.com, and that'll shoot you right to our website. The last one is on social. So I know we have a social media on a lot of different Instagram, Facebook, and that. The only one that I'm really active on is LinkedIn. I like LinkedIn. I think it has a much more business perspective. If you want to go check out my profile and connect up with me, just go to meetmiller.com. That will shoot you right to my LinkedIn profile. So just as a quick reminder, one-on-one strategy meeting, go to strategymeeting.com for our website, or for the law firm, lawwithmiller.com. And to connect up with me on LinkedIn, go to meetmiller.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Devin. I'll put all this in the show notes for all of us listening for easy access. Devin, it was an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Thank you so much.
Hey, it was my pleasure to be on, and glad to be here, and thanks for having me.